Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Mr. Pottinger here with a review presentation for Chapter 1, The World Before 1492. As you're aware, you already had to outline this particular chapter as part of your AP US History summer work. I wanted to take a few moments of your time to recap the major thematic talking points for this chapter in particular so that you'll be able to successfully take the assessment and then move forward in the curriculum while feeling as if you have a real good understanding about the major thematic concepts for this chapter. Keep in mind, the trick to understanding APUS history is understanding the major themes of history from the chapters and, of course, finding ways to weave them together to understand the bigger picture that takes place. So please listen carefully, and then you also might be able to answer the higher order thinking questions at the very end. Let's go ahead and get started. So as you're aware, in Chapter 1, they talk heavily about the peopling of America. The authors of the text basically wanted you to understand that North America was not an empty slate. It was more or less a place that was filled already with native indigenous populations who were already here for years. Now, although these populations have different stories about their origins and how they came about, the fact is that the people who actually came here to North America over the years drastically shaped and transformed the continent in more ways than one. The Bering Land Bridge between North America and Asia was the primary way upon which many people believed that humans actually appeared here in North America in the first place. People gradually spread into North America, Central America, and South America, in that order. The Clovis people might have come to North America around 13,000 years ago, actually, and the spears that they left behind might be a key indicator as far as anthropology and understanding the story of those people. But over time, with changing climate and culture, came a different way of lifestyle for certain peoples. For example, the Anasazi, or Ancient Ones, began building communities in New Mexico and Arizona perhaps about 700 years before the arrival of Christopher Columbus himself. The Cahokia people in the Mississippi Valley, also known as the Mound Builders, created a flourishing culture between 900 and 1350. As you're aware, many of these native indigenous populations have moved over time or might have been decimated due to climatic changes or interactions with other populations as well. The diverse communities of the Americas in the 1400s is eclectic and unique. Please understand that these communities at times worked with each other and against each other. The Pueblo people of the Southwest. Some of the largest American Indian settlements were in the Southwest. Taos Pueblo in northern New Mexico is still inhabited by these native indigenous populations. In the Pueblo and Hopi Southwest, an intricate maze of canals, dams, and terracing allowed agriculture to flourish in a dry climate. Agriculture is key, and with the invention of tools, and of course the betterment of tools over time, these native indigenous populations were able to thrive and survive. The tribes of the Mississippi Valley. The most direct descendants of the Coquia, the people later known as the Creeks, Choctaws, and Chickasaws, settled on the eastern side of the Mississippi River and the southern Appalachian Mountains. These people were eclectic and diverse as well, and had many different types of traditions and customs that became part of what we now know as Indian staple culture. Most of these tribes lived in small communities of 500 to 2,000 people. The Pacific Coast, from the Shasta to the California Indians. In the Pacific Northwest, the Shasta and other tribes lived primarily on the abundant salmon in the rivers. They were a fishing people. Farther down the Pacific coast in California, the Yokut, Miwok, Maidu, and Pomo represented one of the largest concentrations of American Indians in north of Mexico. The Iroquois Confederacy and the tribes of the Atlantic coast. In the Northeast, the original 5 nations of the Iroquois, the Mohawks, Oneidas, Onondagas, Cayugas, and the Senecas developed. On the Atlantic coast were the Algonquin-speaking tribes, the largest of which, the Powhatans, may have included 60,000 or more people. The Aztec, Mayan, and Inca empires. The Aztecs lived in central Mexico by 1400. The Mayans lived in the Yucatan Peninsula from 300 to 900 AD. The Incas lived in South America in villages high in the Andes Mountains, and their empire extended 2,000 miles from north to south. These unique and eclectic people have dramatically changed the very fabric of Central and South America over the years. In fact, your authors make heavy mention of Tenochtitlan as part of one of the greatest ancient cities that existed. Here's the Inca Empire, at least what it's estimated to have looked like in the year 1500. American Indian cultures trade and encounters with Europeans. So trade networks stretched from the Aztec Empire across all parts of North America. Native peoples of North and South America saw themselves as the center of their own world. And as stated before, many of them had their own preconceived notions through folklore about how they came to be. Native American culture tended to understand warfare in ways radically different from most Europeans, and this type of culture clash, if you will, would be further exemplified by further connections that would later be woven by European encounters and conquests. Native American culture areas and trade networks. As you can imagine, the elaborate landscape of North America allowed Europeans and native populations the chance to trade, which had positive and negative effects. But what made this exploration possible in the first place? A changing Europe in the 1400s. The authors make note of the fact that the Vikings sailed in the Atlantic in the around 1800s, but early contact with North America was forgotten by the 1400s. Europe was still recovering from the devastating Black Death and the bubonic plague that arrived in 1348 on rats carried by ships in the Black Sea. Please realize that the bubonic plague was a dramatic event that not only drastically shaped Europe, but also other parts of the world for the time, with interconnected trade routes and came interconnected people. And with interconnected people in the age of a pandemic came, of course, high deaths, to the likes of which the world had never seen to this point. The Ottoman Empire changes Eastern Europe. By the year 1453, Muslim Ottoman Turks conquered the city of Constantinople, the most important city in all of Eastern Europe. Suddenly, Christian Europe was cut off from the lucrative land-based trade in spices and luxury goods with Asia that had existed since the late 1200s. The main reason why this is a turning point or a trip point in history is because, technically speaking, Turkey was the gateway from Asia to Europe, and now, of course, Europeans had to find other trade routes to connect point A to desired point B. This would prove to be both hard, but also beneficial for them as well. Because the rise of Portuguese exploration. Prince Henry of Portugal, nicknamed the Navigator, set up a school of navigation, and soon Portuguese sailors were traveling further and further down the coast of West Africa. In addition, the Portuguese began trading in slaves, and the slave market began to expand and boom over time. England and France. So France and England fought the Hundred Years' War and had several different types of other issues happening between them, which occupied their time and resources. Not only did it deplete their resources, it also depleted their foreign endeavors for the time. England was also not only torn by that, but also religious strife from within, and despite all their troubles, England and France were relatively unified kingdoms. So the unification and the rise of Spain. Meanwhile, the political and cultural and religious unification of Spain, known as the Reconquista, was an extraordinary development. In January 1492, the 800-year-long Islamic presence ended officially in Spain. And that same year, Ferdinand and Isabella expelled all Jews from Spain. In case you're wondering where these names might sound familiar, these were the people who essentially ushered in the age of Columbus and financed him. Africa in the 1400s. The authors of your textbook are very quick to note as well about the diversity of the continents of Asia and Africa at the very end of your chapter. And I think that this map kind of conveys why they did that. As you can see, Africa is not only home to a lot of native indigenous peoples, but it's also home to an eclectic amount of resources which were ripe for picking for people who were onlookers trying to make a lucrative profit. So ancient ties between Africa and Europe. North Africa had been part of the Mediterranean civilization for at least 3,000 years. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, some of the strongest Christian centers were in North Africa. St. Augustine, for example, was born in what is now Algeria. The authors even make note of Mansa Musa and Ibn Battuta, who traveled from point A to point B all throughout the Sahara, and then some, and of course their lucrative wealth was well known. And just south of the Sahara, the Kingdom of Ghana governed much of West Africa for hundreds of years. Mali slowly dominated and replaced Ghana as the leading power in the region. Songhay grew stronger, capturing Timbuktu in 1458, just as Portuguese were exploring the African coast. It should be noted here that yes, Africans were able to understand the value of their resources, but as far as their interconnectability to international markets for the time, they were rather primitive. The kingdoms of Congo, Benin, and surrounding areas had powerful governments too, but they were far less structured than the empires in Mali and Songhai. Congo kings were Catholic, and centralized government and wealth generated by trade also led to military power and prestige. And with that military power and prestige came expansion and domination. Slavery in Africa. Slavery was a significant part of the African economy long before the Portuguese arrived. Most slaves were captured in war from other communities. A more terrible form of slavery was born in the 1400s as the slaves' language, culture, and identity were destroyed. The authors of the text are quick to note that although slavery was not necessarily a Portuguese invention, the fact remains that Europeans were the ones who took the market and made it this gigantic monstrosity of an institution as what it was. Asia in the 1400s. In the 1400s, China was united in a single empire and had been for more than 2,000 years. Beijing had a population that was 50 times larger than London. And for the next 200 years, China became increasingly isolated from the rest of the non Asian world. The authors even make note of the fact that they lost their ambition to engage in worldwide travels to save on resources, and in many ways, isolation can have its benefits and also downfalls. As you can see, Chapter 1 is incredibly diverse because the world is diverse. I think the author spent a good deal of time talking about all parts of the world. To understand the American experience, we have to understand what was happening in the world at the time. Before the age and days of Columbus, clearly we have a unique world with a lot of events that were happening that contributed to the notion and to the endeavors of exploration and advancement. At this time, please go ahead and answer the key concept questions at the bottom of the Google Doc, and please message me if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you.